Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. Welcome back to my channel. As promised, this is part 2 of my Viking doll showing how I made the clothing and weapons. Part 1 was her repaint, and if you missed that video, I will link it down below. Had I not promised part 2, I probably would have given up and this girl would have had no clothes. I had multiple fails for almost everything I made for this project. I'll be showing many of those in the hopes that you can find some value in seeing what didn't work for me and how I got to my final result. If nothing else, hopefully it's entertaining to watch me struggle. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the video. I had an amazing viewer give me incredibly detailed information regarding historically accurate Viking clothing, the colors they wore, and commonly used weapons. I will absolutely be keeping that in mind in the future, as I would really like to make additional Viking dolls down the line. I love all things in the Nordic Viking realm. In her case, I've already veered pretty far away from historically accurate. I'm going for a little bit more of the Viking inspired look. This time around, I'll probably keep her clothing to a more muted palette to keep things from clashing. I'll get to work making the clothing first, starting with the undershirt. Using this extremely detailed pattern that I made, I will cut the cloth to size. Given that the seam allowance is so small, I'm going to make tiny cuts around the neckline to help with the hemming, and I'm also hoping it'll help it lay a little bit nicer. Also, for that reason, I'm just going to hem it with Fabri-Tac glue. And this is how it's looking. I will go ahead and hem this decorative cut the same way. After creating a pattern for her top, I tried to use my sewing machine to hem the bottom and sew up the seams. I haven't exactly figured out what went wrong. I think it may have to do with the tension. So I ended up sticking with hand sewing and hemming a lot of the edges with Fabri-Tac glue. There's a lot of room for improvement, but I will be putting a piece over most of this shirt. I'm gonna do my best not to worry too much about it. At this point, this video is going to be a great example of what not to do. I attempted to make a corset out of the faux leather. I'd originally planned to have the corset open in the front, but as you can see, this is not going to work. Unless we're going for Madonna vibes. I'm scrapping that plan altogether, and I'm instead going to make her an armored top out of Warbla. Before we get to that, I wanted to share with you another struggle that I experienced. These are Gilda Gold Stag's pants, and I will insert a picture of how they originally looked. This is actually my second time darkening Gilda's pants, and for my first Viking, I used this fabric marker by Crafts for All. It came in a pack off of Amazon and it did fairly well. It did darken the pants and they remained flexible. I was pretty happy with the results. However, the second time around, I wanted even darker pants, and so I got this deco fabric marker from Joann's. I did get pearl black instead of black by mistake, but it made the fabric extremely stiff. Most of it washed right out, and it took me forever to color them because this marker was basically dried out from the start. I ended up instead using this Rit fabric dye. I wasn't entirely sure if it would work on these pants because I don't actually know what they're made out of. Luckily, it worked. It worked incredibly well. It even dyed the Velcro. Another conundrum is the shoes. I got these boots in a Monster High lot off of eBay. I have no idea what doll they belong to. If you know, please leave me a comment down below. I would love to know how to get more. I got lucky and found another pair off of eBay. Unfortunately, I didn't consider the fact that Nefera's feet are significantly bigger than the standard Monster High dolls. These are not going to work. I will be attempting to make her a pair of shoes out of Warbla. That is also something I've never done before, so that will be a bit of an experiment as well. Before I get started on the boots, I am first going to make her corset armor out of Warbla. Spoiler alert, this didn't end up working out for her either, but I actually did like the end result. I just didn't think it suited her. So for that reason, I left the footage in just in case you'd like to see how I made it. I just took 2 strips of Warbla and attached them to the inside of the corset, and then I wanted to try it onto the Viking over her shirt to see how everything was laying. I roughly cut out 4 half circle shapes, 2 slightly larger than the others, and I will be adhering those to the top of the straps for just a little extra detail. Okay, this is how it's looking right now. I am not completely happy with the shape of it. I'm probably going to continue to heat it up and mold it as needed, but I ended up learning that for the second piece, I needed to curve the inner part as well to get it to fit around this first piece a little bit better. I'm also gluing on rhinestones to imitate the look of grommets. Once I have those glued on, I am going to paint the armor with a coat of black acrylic paint. I felt like the straps were looking a little too thin, so I added an additional thin strip of Warbla just kind of as an embellishment to thicken up the look of those straps. The black has now dried, and I am going to take a little bit of raw umber by Liquitex and dabbing some of it off. I'm going to kind of dry brush this on there. Around the time that I finished with this armor, I realized it is definitely taking on a little bit more of a militant look and less of the wild Viking look that I was going for. I think this is just a little bit too polished for this look in particular. Third time's the charm, right? I am going to attempt making this corset one more time out of leather and make it with the help of Fabri-Tac glue and my sewing machine. I purchased a corset pattern off of Etsy. I will leave the link to DG Requiem's shop below. I needed to modify the pattern just a little bit for Nefera's body type. I'm sure there was a much easier way to do that, but I couldn't get my printer to scale up the size, so I just ended up modifying it myself. This is in no way a tutorial, as I am about the furthest thing you can get from being a sewing expert, but I wanted to show you the steps I did. I started out by adhering the pieces together with Fabri-Tac glue, and then I secured them together using the sewing machine. After sewing up the back seams, I just made a cut right down the middle, and that will be so I can make the back into a corset. I had to finish up the corset off camera because lacing up the back of this and installing these little eyelets was an extremely fiddly process. But I'm ready to move on to the next step. I have here what I've dubbed the sacrificial slipper. I used this for my previous Viking. I've cut off a piece of it. I plan to put it around her shoulders, something like this, and I've kind of been trying to work out the best way to attach it to her body. What I think I'm gonna try is attaching a chain to both ends and having it kind of wrap under her arms and around her back. Jumping back over to my Nefera model for this, I am going to see how much length I need And here I'm just sewing on the chain to one end of it. Because I want it to be removable, I'm going to sew these snaps onto the other end. Okay, I would just like to state for the record that I am by no means saying that this is a good way to secure this chain, but it is the way that I chose to do it. Let's see if this will work. I don't like that the underside is visible, so I'm going to fold over the edge of it and sew that down. I made this little cylindrical tube out of Warbla, and I molded it around an X-Acto knife, and then I just put a little piece of Warbla on the bottom. I am going to paint this black and give it a little bit of a brown dry brushing, and this will be her arrow holder. And then while it's drying, I'm going to start cutting the little strip of leather that I will use to attach this to her body. Because I wanted the arrow holder to be removable as well, I had to think of a way to do that. I decided to secure one end of the snap onto a piece of faux leather, which I glued around the base of the holder, and then the other end of the snap I attached to the end of the strap. I've just wrapped an elastic around that while it continues to dry. This girl's hair is going to need some major taming at the end. So far, this is how it's looking from the front. And from the back. I currently have it tucked underneath the fur. I am going to attempt to make her some boots out of Warbla. I have never made doll shoes before, and in addition to that, I'm also pretty new to Warbla, so this should be interesting, and hopefully I can make something that I'm happy with. I wanted to first make the pattern out of these foam sheets, and Warbla will stick to the doll if I don't add a layer of protection, so that is why I've put tape around her legs. I'm going to take this pattern and cut it out of Warbla and see if we can't form it to her legs. I wanted to first make my pattern out of craft foam for a couple of reasons. One, because it's flexible material, so I can get a pretty good idea of how my pattern is going to fit, but also because I want to ensure that my Warbla pattern is sized correctly. I definitely don't want to waste any of that material. It is a little on the pricey side, but if you're not already familiar with Warbla, it's a magical material. When heated up with a hairdryer or a heat gun, it becomes super malleable, and then once it cools, it hardens into a plastic-like material. So here I'm just going through the repetitive process of heating up the Warbla and forming it to her feet. Okay, this is currently how it's looking. It is not exactly how I envisioned, but it is good enough. The back, I'm not too worried about that looking messy because I'm going to be cutting a notch in the back to remove the boots anyway. And then here along the edge, I will be putting little pieces that look like a button or clasp. Now that I've got this piece applied, I'm going to do the same with the other side. Okay, I'm back with the mostly finished boot. I still need to put the little clasps on the end of each of these straps. Honestly, it was a disaster trying to get these boots off of the doll. I believe I had these formed too well to her foot, so I think there just wasn't enough space in there to easily pull them off. And the other mistake that I think I made is I had 2 layers on the bottom and I have 2 layers on the top. These are pretty firm. They don't have a lot of give to them. So I'm gonna put the little buttons or clasps on, and then I'm going to paint them. I'm going to paint them black and dry brush some brown over the top of it. And I'm going to do that prior to putting them on her. Once I've got them on, I'm going to put another layer of Warbla on the soles, and hopefully that will hide this disaster. If it means that they're no longer removable, I'm okay with that. I actually decided just to use some rhinestones for the buttons or clasps instead. I'm going to do a black wash just in the areas that I think need a little definition. Taking some gold paint on a detail brush and getting most of it off of the brush, I'm just going to add a little bit of gold along the edges, again, just to bring out some of the details. Off camera, I applied a coat of Liquitex High Gloss Varnish to the boots and then mattified that with a coat of Mr. Super Clear. That just kind of helps provide some protection and prevent chipping. Now I'm going to quickly make her some bracers. Because I use standard sized forearms on the Nefera body, Claudine has so graciously offered her forearms as tribute. Once again, using some craft foam, I made the pattern for the bracers, and I'm just going to sketch 2 of those out on this Warbla and form them to her body. Now that I have the bracers formed, I'm going to give them the same treatment as the boots with a base layer of black acrylic paint, dry brushing brown over the top, and then I will seal them with the Liquitex varnish and then mattify them with Mr. Super Clear. Off camera, I made what I'm calling a hip wrap. I'm sure there's an actual name for it, I just don't know what it is. After I made this hip wrap, I got to thinking about how these would probably realistically be made, and I believe they made these kind of coverings by sewing multiple animal pelts together. I wanted to try this a second time and attempt to make a more realistic version and then decide which version I like better. Dragging out my poor sacrificial slipper again, I'm cutting off pieces in a shape that I think resembles animal pelts, and then I am sewing those pieces onto a strip of faux leather. I wish I could get your opinion because I'm pretty torn on which wrap to use. While I do feel I achieved a more authentic look with the second attempt, I actually think I'm leaning towards the first one I made. Oh, decisions. I've been thinking about what material to make her bow out of, and I think I'm gonna make it out of epoxy sculpt, but to ensure I get the size correct, I'm going to sketch it out first. I'm using her arm and her body as a guide for the size. So when I scale down the size, I think 6 inches is kind of roughly what I'm going for. After looking at lots of different images online, I like the look of the recurve bow the most. This is actually take 2 for sketching out the bow. The first time around I failed to mark the middle, and I don't know why I didn't do that, but this time around I'm going to mark out the center line, which is the 3-inch mark, and then I can use that to hopefully get better symmetry. All right, I think I'm liking this shape well enough to go ahead and move on to the next step. I will be taking epoxy sculpt to make the bow and the points of the arrows. I think I'm going to use either foam or paper for the fletching. I believe that's what it's called. Fletching is the back of the arrow. For the bow, I'm going to take equal parts of A and B, mix those together thoroughly, and try and match it up to my sketch as much as possible. Please be sure to read the manufacturer's safety instructions before using any of the materials I mention in this video. I roll out a snake of clay until it roughly gets to the same width as the middle of my bow. I taper out both of the edges, line it up to the sketch, and that's it. I let it cure for 24 hours and it will be ready for sanding. Okay, off camera I filed down my arrowheads and I painted them with Arteza's Pearl Space Gray. Please excuse the state of my paint tubes. I do acrylic pouring, so everything gets covered in paint. Case in point, this disastrous paintbrush. Taking my poor abused detail brush and this silver acrylic paint, I will be dry brushing it over the edges of the arrows to bring out the details. Once again, I'll be using Liquitex Raw Umber, and I'll be painting that on the shaft of the arrows. This paint isn't super opaque, so it gave a little bit more of a stained effect, and I actually think it ended up looking more realistic that way. To create a flat, even base for the fletching to sit on top of, I wrapped a piece of printer paper around the end and painted it to match. My friend gave me a few beautiful feathers that they found on the ground, and I thought they would be perfect for this project. I was actually shocked to learn that the shaft of the feather is too thick as is. It caused the feathers to be raised too far off of the arrow. In order to get it to lay flat, I actually took an X-Acto knife and very carefully cut down the center of the feather and then cut the fletching to size. I then take my Fabri-Tac glue and glue on 3 feather pieces around the arrow as evenly spaced out as possible. Then I take my scissors and trim down the length of the feathers. And the last step, just to seal everything in and make sure that these don't pop off, I'm going to take a little bit of UV resin, just a tiny little drop. I have a toothpick here to spread it out with. I absolutely should be wearing gloves while using this resin. Please do as I say, not as I do. Here is how the arrows turned out. I tried to take some of the shine down from the resin with just another coat of acrylic paint. It is still a little bit shiny, but not quite so much. But I really love the way the fletching turned out with the feathers, and I hope that they no longer resemble toothpicks. And then off camera, I sanded down the bow because that makes a pretty big mess. So I sanded the bow down off camera, both with a Dremel and then just some sandpaper to smooth it out. And I wanted the bow to be semi-functional. I wanted her to at least be able to pose with it. Instead of using string, I got this thin elastic cord off of Amazon. I will link it down below. Tying little loops onto both ends of the elastic cord gives me the ability to loop them over the ends of the bow and remove them as necessary. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the elastic cord off, give this bow the same painting treatment as everything else with a coat of black acrylic paint, dry brushing the brown, Liquitex high gloss varnish to seal it, and a coat of Mr. Super Clear to mattify it. After the bow had dried and been reassembled, I wrapped a scrap piece of faux leather around the middle, secured it with Fabri-Tac glue, and we are done. Here's a look at the final result. This girl is finally done. It has been a long time coming and there were a lot of firsts for me, but I really hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, please give it a like below as it really helps out my channel. I have an exciting collab coming up for Halloween and some other fun projects in the works. So if you'd like to be notified when I upload videos in the future, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. I truly appreciate your support and thank you so much for watching. Until next time, take care. Oh my gosh. Well, you know, that worked well. And then mattify it with... What is it, honey? You're being very disruptive, Pumpkin.